It's my pleasure to be speaking with Frank Stronach, a global business giant who transformed a one-man tool and die shop started in 1957 into Magna International, one of the world's largest suppliers of automotive technologies. Thank you for speaking with us today, Frank.
Nice to be with you, Mike.
Frank, it has been said that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Today, I'd like to speak with you about economic ideas and the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. Frank, before we begin on our main topics, I'd like to get a better idea of how your brain works. Some people say your brain works like a spreadsheet. Can you describe in your own words how your brain works? What determines your actions? Is it pain avoidance, energy conservation, or pleasure seeking, or a combination of all three?
Well, the number one thing is what you got to do to stay healthy. That should be number one for everybody. And you got to know your body, you got to watch what you eat, you got to watch your attitude. And so there's a lot of things you got to watch, right? And usually they say, dude, that the brain still keeps on growing, right? Even though the rest of the body shrinks and the muscles kind of disappear, but the brain still keeps on growing. And I hope mine is still growing, or at least I feel so.
Do you think your experience of being hungry and the uncertainty and insecurity of that situation is what created or unleashed your extraordinary ability to solve problems?
Well, I think life is really what you experience, huh? You go to periods of times where you be exposed to a wide variety of things, and that keeps forming us. And I think that's what will determine our actions in most cases, right? You kind of mentioned earlier on that I experienced hunger. Yeah, I did, right? Hunger not because I wanted to lose weight. I had hunger, I had no money to buy food. If you experience that you never forget. That's burnt in your soul. Okay, so, and maybe a lot of the things what I've did were determined or were triggered by what I experienced.
All right, let's move over to some of the economic questions. If you were to become the finance minister tomorrow, what would your 100-day roadmap be to put Canada back on track?
Well, the first thing I would do, really what's holding everything back is, and that is actually the primary reason I am delighted to do a podcast with you. I've always said the world has always been dominated by the golden rule and still is. And but I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either. So how can we dismantle the chains of dominations? Not via violent revolutions, via revolutions of the mind, right? And the revolution of the mind would be, we need economic charters. So the message I want to get across is, the human charters of rights alone are not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. Economic charters of rights will lead to economic democracies, and economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. So that is really the core of everything. But let me explain it in a very simple way, right, where people could understand. The key is we got to make the message so simple that people should understand. And this is a grassroots movement. So basically, when we take a look, there's one area where all the politicians agree and business people agree, and most people agree. If the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. They all agree on that. But it's the most important subject. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it, what drives the economy. So the economy is driven by three forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. The message I want to get across loud and clear is, without workers, you can't make a profit. So that's the dilemma, right? We have never let workers participate in accumulating wealth. And if we don't make capitalists out of the workers, the capitalistic system's got no chance to survive. So we've got to be very careful. We should not destroy the capitalistic system. We have to harness it. And especially, I'm saying, small companies below 300 employees can totally, or should totally, be free to operate within the free enterprise system. Free enterprise is the basis for free society. Without free enterprise, you cannot have a free society.
You pioneered fair enterprise, profit sharing, no unions but employees with a share in the profits. In 2025, with contract work and artificial intelligence displacing the traditional labor force, is that model still viable?
It's always, the model is viable if, look, without workers you can't make a profit. So the whole point is, you see, I'm not preaching to take away from the rich. I'm saying we must let workers participate when we bake the economic pie. If they participate and they know they get a portion, a slice of the profits, their thinking is totally different. Let me give you an example, right? In about 1980s, in the early 80s, I put in a corporate constitution at Magna. The basic corporate constitution, or the main principle of the constitution was, we set aside what we do with the profits, how we allocate them. So 20% of the profits went to the shareholders in the form of a dividend. 10% of the profits went to the workers over and above their wages. 6% of the profits went to management. 7% of the profits were set aside for research. Research is the basis for the future. And 2% were aside for society, for charity. Okay? When I put in that formula, our profits climbed the first year 40%, the second year 100%, the third year 200%. And again, as I said before, if you let workers participate in profit sharing, you release an energy of untold proportions. Okay? Then their mind starts to think. Okay? Because they're on the front line. They're the first people to know how can we make things better. So it's a very simplistic, but we haven't done it because of the golden rule. The very rich don't want to share the profits with the working class. But the rulers of the gold, you don't see them anymore. They might be in Hawaii, they might be in Beverly Hills, they might be in Monaco, but they're there. They don't want to share. So that's why, but still, we need a very civilized revolution, no destructive revolution. The revolution is, we must let workers participate in profits.
The famous Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises said central planning always fails, yet at every level of government in Canada they create new taxes, subsidies, price controls, regulations, minimum wage laws, and government bailouts. Why is the economy not collapsed yet?
Well, the economy doesn't function, right? So it will take a while till it collapses, you know. And some countries went bankrupt where the economy collapsed, right? So what we have in Canada now is that the plain fact is our living standards went down about 50% over the last 50 years. So how come? Why is that? It is a country which imports more and more and exports less and less. The living standards will decline, okay? And the other problem is we print too much monies, okay? Every housewife knows she cannot spend more monies than what the husband brings in. Otherwise they wind up in a poorhouse. Every farmer knows he cannot spend more monies than what he gets for the crop. Otherwise he loses the farm. Every small businesswoman or businessman know they cannot spend more than the profits they make. Otherwise they go bankrupt. But we cannot let government print monies and promise. And sometimes we look back in history and find a good example what things should be done or the way they should be done. One was Winston Churchill. He was more than a politician, he was a statesman. In his later years, he said, "Goddamn Parliament, it doesn't work. There's only politicians in Parliament. The mandate of a politician is to be elected or re-elected." That, he said, the whole country is managed by political reasons rather than socioeconomic. So Winston said, we need a chamber of citizens to balance out the politicians in Parliament. But, time goes by, there's always a better way of doing things. Even those were wise words in those days. I'm saying in Canada, small business would be the chamber of citizens for Canada. If small business does well, the whole country will do well. So we must make sure to take the chains of small business and set it free.
In Canada, weak consumer confidence, cautious business investment, and the lingering effects of global tariffs are preventing economic growth. What do you think are the top 2 or 3 factors that could turn that around?
The key is always we gotta let workers participate. We need an environment. In small businesses, we don't need government how to tell the business people how to run it. Let them, no small business can grow unless they look after the smart workers. The smart workers in small business, it could be a plain bonus. It could be maybe profit sharing. It could be maybe equity participation. Let small business decide. When business grows beyond 300 employees, then we need, the capitalism needs harnessing. Then the companies have to share the profits with the workers. So it's a simple fact. I'm saying we should not destroy capitalism. Okay, we must let workers participate and let them accumulate so they could become capitalists. The one thing we should think about it, if you're not economically free, you're not a free person. What do I mean by being economically free? What would be the minimum standards to be economically free? The minimum standards would be if a Canadian woman or a Canadian man worked for 30 years, they should have enough accumulated that they own their own house or condo. Might have been a small one. Mortgage-free. In addition, they should have at least $300,000 in the bank to subsidize their old age pension, and they can choose their own road to happiness for the remaining years. How many do you know which would have the minimum standards? There's something drastically wrong. Okay, we're going backwards.
For the viewers, I'd like to describe the term Catalaxy. Catalaxy is the spontaneous order that emerges when free individuals pursue their own ends through voluntary exchange, coordinated only by prices and rules, not controlled by central planning. Catalaxy was kind of your operating system for Magna. In my opinion, you built a $40 billion company as a living Catalaxy. How can we implement the same factors that made Magna successful on a national level?
No, Magna, there was a careful planning, right? And again, it was an accumulation of evolutions, right? Let me tell you a quick story, because sometimes it's very difficult to understand how could build one person a company with 180,000 employees, right? So when I arrived in Toronto in 1955, I had $200. I'm a tool and die maker by trade. I found the job relative quick, and after a few months, the owner of the tool shop, there were 10 people, he said, "Frank, you're doing a great job. I want you to be a partner of mine." My chest swelled a bit, but he never wrote it down. He was a nice man, actually, but he never wrote it down. But I said, there's nothing to it to run a business. I looked in the papers, I found a job, doubled the amount of money. I rented a very small room. The shower and the toilet were out in the hallway. But anyway, 2 years later, I had $5,000 saved up. $5,000 in 1957, you could buy a small house, a small farm. But what I did, I rented a small building, right, maybe like a 4-car garage, bought a few used machines, and out I went hustling. I went in the factory and I said to the owners, I would love to, if they got any problems, I would like to take a look at it. I'm great in solving problems. If I can't solve them, they don't have to pay me. Obviously, I solved problems because after 1 month, I hired a new worker. After 1 year, I had 10 people. After 2 years, I had 20 people. And it's the first evolution which brought about a great change, right? I noticed my foreman was a German fellow by the name of Hermann. I said, Hermann, what's the matter with you lately? You're different. Well, he said, Frank, I wanted to talk to you anyway. I said, what about? Well, I started my own business. I said, I'll sympathize with that. Let's talk tomorrow. Maybe we find a better answer. There's always better answers. So anyway, that evening I was talking to myself. I said, if that foreman's going to leave me, that would stifle my growth. No good. The next reason I liked even less. If that foreman's got to leave me, I can do all the work myself. And the third reason was, if I hire a foreman, I don't show him how a business is run, I still got to do all the work. And if I show a worker how business is run, after 1 or 2 years, they start their own business. So anyway, to make a long story short, I said to Herman the next day, look, why don't we open up a factory, a new one? You own 1/3, I own 2/3. He said, looked at me, do you mean it? I said, yes. So immediately, it didn't take us long to get that factory going. He worked like crazy. That was his factory. He was so proud. And then over the next 5 years, I took 6 more foremans. We had 7 factories when I took them from being a private company to a public company. And this is where I'm going to be, I remembered the hard times I had, when I was hungry, etc. I said, gee, if we can do something for the workers, we can change, we could eliminate poverty. So this is when I converted the private company to a public company, because the workers could share half of the profits they got in cash and the other half in shares. So they had additional monies to buy things, and the shares kept climbing, and we had about 1/3 of our labor force were women. And we had women, they operated just some plain easy machines. They had maybe $200,000-300,000 in their account. Right? The shares rose because the company did well, so everybody benefited.
Why don't you think more companies have copied that model?
That's what I'm wondering too, right? It's unless you be in a certain position, it's very, young, small bit, they struggle and say, no, I don't want to give things up, etc., etc. But I wonder that, that's why, but I wrote a book, the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights, which I gave a bit of how to get started, right? How to to overcome that and get going. If you share more, you make more monies. That's the interesting part, right? Okay.
Let's focus on the Economic Charter. Can you elaborate on the 7 key principles of the Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibility that you've proposed for Canada?
Yes.
And how do they draw from your fair enterprise philosophy at Magna?
Not too much. It's still the fair enterprise system was sort of the forerunner, right, of the, our shareholders had liked it, but you could not maybe with existing companies apply it. It would have created havoc. So basically it's set up that you, like for small companies which started out to grow, we give advice how and what, and but there's the 7 principles. Principle 1 is a country should have no debt, okay? And again, I'm not advising we should go about with a chainsaw. First of all, it doesn't work. And secondly, we want to be civilized. So the debt should be limited for every year, a few percentage. So 20 years, Canada should be debt-free. Okay, because I think I just listened on the radio today that I think the service that is about 55 billion, right? Imagine what we could do in 55 billion if we don't have to pay that to the rulers. Okay, so that's very important. The second principle is we got, and I'm not blaming the bureaucrats. In a civilized country, every citizen could find a job, whatever the openings are. It's the system's wrong. So basically, I'm saying the bureaucrats have to be in a certain ratio to the population. There was a recent survey done. The survey said Canada had 100 bureaucrats per 1,000 people. The United States had 70 bureaucrats per 1,000 people. Japan had 40 bureaucrats per 1,000 people. So when I look back about 50 years, there were maybe 10 bureaucrats per 1,000 people, right? And maybe 20 bureaucrats per, that might be about fair because you need some rules and some regulation, but we are way, way, way over-regulated. So number two is we gotta reduce, but I wanna think, we're not firing bureaucrats, right? Maybe the top bureaucrats in every ministry department should be let go because they had the major influence and they steered the thing wrong, but not the average bureaucrat, right? So let them, so there be a hiring freeze, right? So number three is our tax system got to be simple. Like I said early on, if you make more profits, you pay more taxes. You pay less profits, you pay less. So you could have a black and white formula, you know, and no more loopholes, right? Because we have hundreds of thousands of tax lawyers creating loopholes, right? Where you pay less taxes or no taxes, right? Okay, so the tax system's got to be verified, simplified. Number four is where small business, we got to take the chains off with the red tape. We got to give them, basically, I wanted them, look, you got to band together. You will be a major force. If you band together, you should not pay a business tax because small business want to grow. If they hire one or two employees, they can grow. And the government makes more monies with the income from employees, right? More than the profits if they tax from small companies. And imagine there's about close to 1 million small business now. If they hire 2 or 3 jobs, that'd be, I mean, the country would bloom economically, right? That's what we got to do, right? And get the regulators out of small business. Governments have no business to be in the small business. Let them be free. We got to set them free. So that's number 4. Number 5 is when the small business grow above 300, then they got to share the profits by law. All right? Okay? That's the thing. And number 6 is high school students. High school should end at grade 10. And then we should expose to the students to the trades. Grade 11, grade 12 should be exposed to the trades. If they want to go to university after grade 12, fine, let everybody be. It's a free country. But this would be a great win for the students because they would accumulate additional know-how. Okay, and it's know-how. The more know-how you have, the higher your income. Okay, so you could accumulate a lot of know-how. And the country would have a great win because we haven't got tradespeople anymore. Number 7 is, and that's very dear to my heart, no Canadian kid should go to school hungry. No Canadian kid should leave the school hungry. And by law, the food would have to be organic. And that would trigger other problems. Family, we should say, countries which could feed their people, never had a problem. Canada, when the whole country was run by family farms, Canada never had a problem. But now family farms are practically on welfare. And kids of family farmers say, Mom, Dad, I don't want to be in a farming, I don't want to be in welfare. So I do say we need a family farm fund, right? Where we could subsidize if they grow organic foods. That's not a subsidy because we could save billions and billions on medical costs if people, especially the kids, eat organic food. We got to realize, but 95% food eaten in North America, that means the United States and Canada, comes from industrial farms. In industrial farms, you see no more eagles fly, because why? There's no more rabbits. There's no more pheasants. We spray so much fungicide and pesticides, we kill everything. You know, we are grossly negligent to our young people. They haven't got a chance to grow up healthy. If you're not growing up healthy, you know, your knowledge, everything is lacking, and maybe the people with the golden, that's what they want. That's why you could manipulate a society a lot easier, right, than a learned society. So that's the dilemma.
How do you envision implementing mandatory profit sharing for companies with over 300 employees as part of this economic charter? And what challenges do you anticipate from businesses or governments?
Well, as I said, existing businesses is not, right? And so this would hold true for new businesses which started new and grow up to 300. The owners will be happy because they know they made a lot more monies. You know, when my profit sharing tripled or quadrupled, right? When we had profit sharing, so the owners would be quite happy, and even if government, and I want to get government out as much as possible from running the business, but capitalism needs harnessing, okay? Because we all know basically capitalism is destroying itself, because every day there's less capitalists. In nature, when a species does not reproduce itself, another species will take over. And the laws of nature are much stronger than man-made law. So basically, if we do not harness capitalism, maybe in 100 years, 50 capitalists will rule the whole world. It's another form of kingdom. Okay, so basically the message I want to get, we should not destroy capitalism. We got to set it free. Give it freedom below 300 employees. And if they grow larger, then they gotta share with the employees, because the original investors or entrepreneurs are not there. Okay, so it's a very simple formula, you know. We could minimize the printing of money, inflation, and we shouldn't have debt. Right now, we've got, just to pay for the debt, we have about 55 billion. What we can do with the 55 billion? Okay, so it's the message is so easy to understand, right? So if it's grassroots, I think everybody should try to spread the message. I hope I'm still alive when I'd like to see that the economic charter will be part of the Canadian law. Okay, I hope, but if not, I know I've opened the door, and you can never close the door. It will come.
I think you've kind of answered this question already, but I'll ask it. In what ways has the Magna Corporate Constitution's economic charter influenced the company's growth, and do you see it as a model that could be scaled nationally to boost productivity and reduce inequality?
Well, that's why with Magna, I learned a lesson, right? We go to evolutionary processes. Nobody, as time goes on, you know, your mind changes, you get to your experience, etc., right? So there's no wise man is born wise, right? What you accumulate, right? So it's a great learning thing, right? 180,000, the employees were happy, right? We had the most modern human resource structure, because, as I said earlier on, 1/3 of our labor force were women, right? That means we had about 60,000 women, right? So we created hotlines. If something wasn't right, a woman could call a hotline, and we had investigators, right? So every day I went to work, I always asked myself, what do I have to do that people respect me? Okay?
You've advocated for fiscal responsibilities like balanced budgets and low government overhead in the Charter. How would you enforce these to prevent economic backsliding, especially amid current debt concerns?
It must be the law. The economic charter does say the law must provide that you must have balanced budgets. So you cannot give. You mean politicians, people with flaw, with thing here, and so you can, it's flawed, right? So we got to make sure it's not flawed, it's done right. And the other rule is you got to get small business, has no business in small business. The government has no business in small business. So those are the rules governments have to apply to, okay? In small business, only two rules will apply: workplace safety, and you cannot dump poison chemicals in your backyard. So the principles are kept that there's no politics involved. Those 7 principles, I think we could find consensus. The more principles you have, the more difficult it is to find consensus. But basically, that would bring Canada back on a sound economic footing. That's what it's all about. We gotta get on good, sound economic principles.
What role do you see the universities playing in developing and refining this economic charter? And have you made progress on collaborating with institutions like universities or economic institutes?
Well, it's I was on board of some major companies, and I was on board of quite a few universities. I gave lectures right across Harvard, in the States, to Canada and to Europe. And when I look back, when I kind of stepped away from most of it, I criticized myself because I was on the boards of directors and I didn't bring forward something new. Because I always, what is the mandate of a university? The mandate of a university is to teach young people how can we have a more civilized society. Now, universities got great faculties in medicine, faculties in technology, in arts, etc., but very little in regards to humanity. So universities would be ideal institutions to explore what structures do we need which would lead to an ideal society. We have no structure, we have no blueprint. Okay? So it is, I think I'm opening up a whole new phase of society, right? Where we do have, look, we gotta have a blueprint. What be an ideal society? So when we take a look at, that's more interesting also for people which listen now. Basically, there's 2 economic systems shown up in the world, right, which are growing. One is the communistic one, where Russia and China, they operated. Basically, that functions like this. You have 10% of the population are part of the military. Another 10% of the population are the super bureaucrats. The 20%, till the 80% don't cross the line or else. Yes, workers there's less hunger than in Western countries. There's more shelter than there's in Western countries, but there's less freedom. And the Americans, the original Americans, freedom meant everything. People gave their lives for freedom, right? So but we have to look at the capitalistic system. 1% now holds approximately 50% in the United States. They have better statistics. 1% of the people in the States hold about 50% of all the wealth. The 1% till the 99%, you got all the freedom in the world. You're also free to be hungry. Okay? So that is a dilemma, right? When we look at the inner cities, In the United States, it's like I think some of the slums in India are better than some of those in the inner cities in the United States. So we have a major problem, right? Okay, so we must set we must allow workers to participate in baking the economic pie. We must create capitalism. So let me refer back to the statement, what are the minimum standards of economic freedom? Because I said early on, if you're not economically free, you're not a free person, you're a servant. I'm saying that's a very important thing. Like you might say I grew up in Canada, even though I was 20 when I arrived, but I've more than 70 years I'm in Canada, so I think I'm more of a Canadian than most Canadians, because this is such a great country. Don't let's forgo it, huh? I had factories. I had 440 factories in 34 different countries. I could have lived in any one of those countries, because when we're young, we all hustle a bit to make some money so we can live in dignity. I could live in dignity in all those countries. I choose Canada. It's great, so don't let's forgo it. We can't do it, okay? Small business got to listen. The small business step up, right? They understand it a little better, and we got to free small business. If they band together, they could be free. But the very important part is, I would say, 2/3 of Canadians want to work hard, okay? With the economic charter, 2/3 could become economically free. You know what that means. That would be such a strong middle class, much stronger than what we ever had. And not looking down upon the 1/3, because we have to realize people go to problems. Kids could fall off a tree, are handicapped. There's so many where we need a country can only be measured the way they look after people which can look after themselves, okay? So we need a civilized society must have minimum standards. Quickly said is, no person must go hungry in a civilized country, and every person must have shelter. It might be primitive, it might be simple. Those could be done by the armies, which it would cost a fraction of what we spend now, but the social service would be so much improved, okay? So that we should think about it. So 2/3 of Canadians, I know they want to work hard. The reason why they get up in the morning is they want to make a better life for themselves and their families. And they could choose, they would reach economic freedom. Right now, there's maybe only 1%. Okay, so that's what it's all about.
How does the Economic Charter address skilled trades training and apprenticeships? And why do you believe this is essential for Canada's economic future?
Well, let's start. A farmer cannot grow any food if he hasn't got seeds. I think everybody agrees on that. A society cannot build products unless it got skilled labor. We totally neglected skilled labor. Canada had great skilled labor, but I would say what increasing for the last 40, 50 years ago it started, but the last solid 20 years, when you saw a new building going up, it wasn't a factory where we make things, it was another warehouse. We became a nation of warehouse operators. Okay, if you haven't got skilled labor, there's no way you can make products. You see, when I run Magna, I have the largest skilled labor pool in the world.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because in some of the skilled trades, almost 50% of the people are over the age of 55. So they're going to be retiring in a very short amount of time, and we're going to have a tremendous vacuum a lack of skilled trades.
We have a vacuum now. Might it be plumbers, might it be electricians, might it be roofers, might it be, there's so many. We have a lack of trade now, and it will be increasing because it's basically, a lot of immigrants, a lot of Canadians worked hard, and they say, gee, I'd like to see a better future for my kids. I want them to be maybe a financial guru or a lawyer or whatever, right? But it's, we gotta say, when you go into the trades, it's a lot easier to have your own business, right? Quicker, right? Okay. And so let me give you an example, right? The strength of Magna was we had an economic charter, and we also had the economic charter. You could really not, it would trigger a huge lawsuit. You cannot change that. But I think Magna did created one problem. They started to centralize, okay? I started to decentralize, huh? I did not allow more than 300 workers per factory, right? Because when you have large factories and things don't work, you got a large problem. If you got a small factory, things don't work, you have a small problem. And most of all, workers don't want to become a number. Factories with 300 employees, people are people, right? They're not numbers, right? So that's but let me give you an example. I had some managers come to me and say, Frank, I want to make more money. I said, that's nice to hear. There's no problem. All you have to do is be smart, then you make more money. Well, they say, but you stifle me to make more money. What do you mean by that? Well, you don't allow me more than 300 employees per factory. So I said, that doesn't mean that I stifle you. Just think about it to be smart. So finally I had to tell them, look, if you be smart, you groom the assistant manager of your factory, and he becomes the manager. I give you a cut from the old factory. I give you the money to build a new factory, and you get a cut there too. I had managers replace themselves maybe 10 times. They made $10 million a year or more.
Wow.
Okay, so it's just so you don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to be a tax specialist, a financial thing here. In the trade too, yes, I will. It's another tool than the computers, right? But you cannot grow tomatoes with AI, right? There's a thing, you cannot replace common sense, right? So there still be, right? But that's exactly the living standard should be much higher because we have more modern tools to make things and feed ourselves. So it's not, we can't the other way around, right? Everybody knows you could buy a house 50, 60 years ago, maybe for $30,000, and that house here now will be what, maybe $1.5 million. Okay, so it's gone. You cannot. It's not affordable. So we've gone haywire. We've gone the wrong direction.
Looking ahead, what steps is the Stronach Foundation for Economic Rights taking to build grassroots support for adopting this charter? And do you have a timeline for potential implementation?
Well, it would be the sooner the economic charter of rights were implemented into the law in Canada, the more quicker the living standards could be improved, right? So that is, the ruling class would not like to see that, right? We don't teach economics in universities. We don't, right? Or the right economics, we don't teach it, right? So basically, it's grassroots, right? It's got to be understood on a grassroots level. So one thing we want to do is to maybe get it done quicker. We want to work on municipalities, because really municipalities are left with the problems. with the Ottawa and Queen's Park create the problem, and then municipalities have to live with it. Okay, in Ottawa, everybody lives after government because all the, call it donut makers, dry cleaners, because there's so many hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats, and they gotta buy donuts, they gotta buy laundry, clean things. So they're not really hurting, right? But the municipalities where there's no, things are grim, right? The food lines, the ones which have got no shelter, it's a major problem. So basically, we like to speak to the mayor and councillors and say, look, if you support an economic charter of rights, that it would be put in the law, the living standards could be improved enormously. And basically, everybody should work, that the living standard should be improved. Okay, if you be against it, I don't think you get elected, because people know you're against the working class. Okay, so they should know. So people in Ottawa and on the local level, they should know if they be against the economic charter, they're against the working class.
Frank, I'm going to read a bit from your book.
Sure.
When I was going through it, I thought this was probably one of the most important points that you made. And you wrote, unless we are first able to conceive what an ideal society might look like, we can't put into place the building blocks needed to create that society. In other words, if there is no conception of an ideal society or no roadmap of how to get there, then we'll never arrive at our destination. And I think it's probably the most important thing, because if we don't set out a goal, then we're never going to achieve that goal.
That's the important goal, because that's why I mentioned universities. We got great faculties, right, in regards to medicine, technology, and art, but very little, if hardly any faculties in regards to humanity. And I'm saying they would be the ideal institutions, but we gotta change. What is the basic rules? What you gotta teach the young people. Right now, we teach them, look, don't understand the economics, because otherwise we get to share the profits. So that's really the core, right? You need a blueprint. What would constitute an ideal society? If you be against the economic charter of rights, you're against the working class, because there's no question the economic charter of rights would eliminate poverty, and 2/3 of the people could find economic freedom. Okay, it would be Canada could be the role model, for the world.